Hi folks, we're going to talk a little bit about quantum physics. It's not going to get very deep because my understanding of it isn't very deep. I don't have a background in calculus, I can't understand the mathematics. But I wanted to understand something about quantum physics purely because there seems to be some sort of snug marriage between ideas of a unified field and the sort of spirituality that has been around in more esoteric arenas for millennia. And by that I'm talking about the Advaita school of Hinduism, I'm talking about Zen Buddhism, I'm talking about even the Jewish Kabbalah, and in many forms of occultism. The universe is one. Everything is one. You are one with it. There is no you separate from it. You are it. You find this all over the place in spirituality. You certainly don't find it in the traditional monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. They're based on dualism, which is the separation of everything. You are fundamentally separate from the universe. The universe is fundamentally separate from this being they call God. Everything's separate from everything, and that's the kind of understanding that you get there. There are, of course, esoteric forms of that too. There's Gnosticism, which I haven't really looked into, but I have a feeling that it alludes to this view that everything is one, perhaps. Anyway, quantum physics. I've read Brian Cox's book, The Quantum Universe. I've also seen him lecture on the subject on a documentary where he talked predominantly about the double slit experiment. And the reason I'm making this video really is because I recently watched a short video where Sam Harris, the atheist, was going up against the spiritual guy Deepak Chopra. Now, I'm not really a big Deepak Chopra fan or anything, but when I listened to him, he was asked to give a reason why God exists, and I was listening to him, and he was coming up with the kind of abstract thinking that resonates with me, the idea that, behind everything, everything's one, and you can, if you wish, use the word God as an abstract term for this mystery that lies behind everything that we can't conceptualize. So I was listening to Deepak thinking, well, it's not quite how I would say it, but yeah, I get where you're going with this. And Deepak Chopra brought in quantum physics, which he did it in a manner that I think was legitimate. Now, I'm no quantum physicist, but well, hear me out. Let's just see where this goes. So he was then accused of trafficking in woo-woo. Now, woo-woo is the word that quantum physicists seem to use when their science comes up against anything of a mystical nature or a paranormal nature even. So Brian Cox would call, and he has called, telepathy and psychokinesis woo-woo. And he would say that the science of quantum physics, it doesn't allow for woo-woo. It just allows for the elegance of the world around us. The world around us is what comes out of quantum physics. But, here I am going up against the might of Brian Cox, whom I admire very much, and the might of Sam Harris. But Sam Harris against Deepak Chopra, basically what he did was he said that Deepak Chopra had no right to invoke quantum physics in any shape or form because he wasn't a theoretical physicist, and he was lecturing to a room which would have had theoretical physicists in the audience. So how dare you mention anything about quantum physics? And then he made fun of him, at which point the audience laughed, and then he pretended to win the argument. And I gotta say, much as I've enjoyed Sam Harris's lectures and I resonate with a lot of his views, I lost quite a bit of respect for him in that, because he just didn't seem to get what Deepak Chopra was alluding to, that there is something behind it all. And one way to come to an understanding that that is the case is to get past this classical world of apparently separate objects into the quantum world where everything is entangled as a unity. And what I'm seeing among quantum physicists is a failure to make this science relevant to their life in some kind of meaningful way. It's like they understand that the world of classical objects is made up of this fuzzier, entangled world of unity, and yet they still keep using the classical world as the basis of everything. So even though we know this is all made from that, we still want to say, oh, it's only this, it really is separate. Yes, we understand it's all entangled in that domain, but no, it's all separate. Everything's separate. We're living with dualism. Dualism is the ground of being. But it's not. Because the macroscopic comes from, I don't want to say the microscopic, but get beyond the microscopic into the atom. This world comes from that. So you can't say, as I've alluded to in previous videos, you can't keep saying I this, I that, I think this, as if there's a real thing called I. Because if everything's just this unified field, then there's no you separate from the unified field. So you are the unified field. You are it. You are everything that exists. Of course, that makes no sense in the classical world because we appear to be separate. So the best way I can think of to wrap my head around that is that the feeling of being isolate self-consciousness is the entire universe or the entire unified field focused into a point of limited awareness. But what really is the unified field. Now, when you say quantum physics doesn't allow for any woo-woo, that's not true. That's just not a true statement, because with quantum physics we've done away with the speed of light barrier. We've got electrons bouncing all around the universe in a way that defies all common sense. So it's like, the Andromeda galaxy from a classical perspective might be many, many light years away, but from a quantum perspective it's right next door. It doesn't even take a second for an electron to bounce around this whole place. Everything's entangled, nothing's separate. Distance is immaterial. That is the world that holds this world together. So how can you really say that telepathy is impossible when you don't really know what a mind is, right? And distance isn't a factor. How can you say that there isn't something, some mechanism that we haven't uncovered yet that allows telepathy to be possible? You can't say it's impossible because you've done away with the world of duality. You've done away with the idea that distance is some kind of absolute barrier. How can you say that psychokinesis is impossible when we don't really understand what holds everything together? I understand that this consciousness can reach out into this brain, into this body, and lift an object, right? Perhaps that consciousness can reach out into this unified field in a way that does not use the brain and the body. That's what my own personal experiments with psychokinesis allude to. But it just gets called woo-woo. It's not possible because we really are living in a classical world and that's the real world. No, this is more like the Matrix. And that's what the science really says. Now, if there's a quantum physicist watching, just correct me if I'm wrong. Explain to me why the classical world is more real than the quantum world. Because that seems to be the sort of paradigm that a lot of these people are stuck with. And I would suspect it comes out of a background that recognizes that we've had classical Newtonian science far longer than we've had quantum theory. So it's kind of like we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. You know, for me personally, you know, I'm glad I live in an era where we have this sort of physics. And I do believe that it confirms what some mystics have known for millennia. Even though that's not something that quantum physicists like to admit to, it does seem to confirm that. The one era that I would not have liked to have lived in is the era from Newton to about the 1920s or so, when quantum physics was kind of starting off. Because that was the arena where we thought everything really was dualistic, where we thought distances were absolute, unbreakable, and it was an era where God was being pushed out of the picture, where religion was being seen as fallacious. And I would have found that just the most depressing sense of reality. And in fact I did, because I lived a part of my life as that sort of atheist, as the sort of atheist who only understands dualism because he's only ever had a high school science education and nothing beyond that. So I had no appreciation of the idea that there's a more fundamental reality underlying this reality. So I guess that's what it must have been like to be a scientist before quantum physics came around. Unless you were the sort of scientist who had a kind of an intelligent religious or mystical background. So quantum physicists don't like woo-woo. Hard luck. Because quantum physics defends woo-woo.